plan on being here.
Of course, yeah. You usually give us that to carry.
That's why I was there.
There you go.
I never seen it. You see it from the
There you go.
Oh, okay. I've been there.
He's got 20-some acres there. Actually, he sold his.
Good evening and welcome to the May 17th, 2016 regular Salem City Council meeting. It will now come to order. The invocation this evening will be given by Steve Faber from the Parks Department and remain standing for the pledge following that.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love for us and the way you demonstrate it to us each day. Father, we're grateful for the opportunities that we have to serve each other and to build community among ourselves and with you. We pray that your wisdom and guidance would be in this meeting and always with the leadership and the people who live in this town. Father, may we learn to agree and move forward, and may we learn to disagree agreeably. Father, may we please you in all that we do and say. Thank you for your blessings and your favor. May we always know that. May we be forgiven for those things we do wrong, and may the sick among us know health and strength. May the lost be found, and may those who grieve find comfort and peace. Thank you for being our friend and for your love that never ends. It's in the strong name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Cushman?
Here.
Mrs. Dickey? Mr. Gall?
Here.
Mr. Nestic? Mr. Pepperidis?
Here.
Mr. Whitehill?
Here.
5 members.
Do I have a motion? Mr. Whitehill.
Move to excuse Mr. Nestor.
Mr. Cushman seconds that. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
He is excused. Mr. Pepperidis.
Like to excuse Cindy Dickey.
Right. Mr. Cushman seconds that. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Pepperidis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, she is excused. Everyone's received a copy of the minutes from the May 3rd, 2016 meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. We have no petitions and remonstrances this evening. We'll move on then to the receiving of visitors. First, Richard Fast, sewage service. Sir, if you just come up to the podium, please.
How are you all doing tonight? My name's Richard Fast, and I live at 1076 West State Street, and I've come looking for some help from the city. I actually live in the township, and I recently put my house up for sale, and the county came and did an inspection on my sewage system, and it failed. I had a hard time believing it because I've never had any trouble with it, so I paid for another inspection for them to come and do it again, and it failed a second time. On the second visit, I was advised that they would not give me a permit for repair or replacement because I was within 250 feet of city sanitation service. So we were in a bit of a quandary, didn't know what to do. I contacted House and Baird because I had no idea. I mean, it was my first time dealing with something like this, so I contacted them, and they said I needed to get a hold of someone in the utilities department or something to see what we needed to do. And they told me that the Utilities Commission would have to get together and vote and see if it would be okay for me to do that, because the distance of where I'm at's about 180 feet, and it's out by the Big Dog restaurant. So anyway, I got kind of a sketchy estimate, and it took quite a while to do this, and the lady that was purchasing my property, it took so much time, she backed out of the deal, because I don't have sewage, you know, and nothing there. So anyway, we got another buyer, and I'm still working on getting things taken care of, and the folks agreed, I knew there was gonna be maybe annexation possible, so when the new people signed a contract, I put on the, had the realtors put on the bottom that it was possible we'd have to annex, but I would have to get my neighbors to go along, cause there's a house between me and the city. Nobody wants to do that, so I said I would put a deed restriction on. I talked to Attorney Plummer, and I said, what do I need to do? She said, well, you probably could do a deed restriction, so when the time comes they get in the same position you are, you'll be contingent on going into the city. So, what I'm asking for is permission to put the hookup in. I'll have to run the line across. I guess ODOT owns the property all in front of our properties. That's where the old Stark Electric Railroad was at. And it could be somewhere between $8,000 and $16,000 to do the tie-in. I'm gonna have to put a manhole, from my understanding, on my property for a clean out. And it has to be like an 8-inch line or something that goes by EPA standard. I'm gonna have to pay for all that. I'll pay for anything it costs to get tied into the city. I'm willing to pick up that expense, but I have to have permission from you guys, because there's nothing, I mean, I'm kind of stuck in the middle. Like, the EPA has a new law where they're making me do something, but I'm kind of dependent on you guys to help me out and make an allowance for me to tie in, because I'm not, I'm not a citizen of the city of Salem. I mean, I've lived here all my life and
Sure.
I'm kind of needing some help. So if you guys could do that for me, it'd be greatly appreciated.
We had talked a little bit previously with regards to this matter, and Mr. Gall, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Utilities Commission is referring this or requesting this.
The Utilities Commission has met now twice on the matter, and they have approved the tap-in, but subject only to the allowance that's available through an exception through this council.
All right.
And so it has been submitted to the council for that purpose.
All right. With that then, I think the appropriate step, sir, will be to refer this to the Utilities Committee, which is a part of council. When Mr. Gall, who is the head of that, sets that meeting, you can appear there and, for the record, go over all of that stuff again so that they're aware of that, and then they can take whatever action they determine is necessary with regards to that.
Very good.
All right?
All right, thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you.
Mr. President? Excuse me?
Mr. Pastor?
Mr. Gold, may I ask you a question? If this comes before your committee, do you foresee this coming out of your committee and on to council, so this man's issue can be resolved quickly?
I can't speak for the two members of my committee that are not here, Mr. Cushman, but I intend to call a meeting of the committee as soon as possible, and I'm hoping that they unfortunately are not available to commit to a time frame. At this point, I'm certainly looking to the availability of meeting immediately after the committee of the whole meeting, since we're already here. If they're available and can stay after that, I see that as a possibility. And I intend to, under committee reports tonight, announce a meeting of the Utilities Committee for that purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Gall, if your committee members can't meet that evening, is it possible, Mr. President, to move this to a committee of the whole agenda just to get this man an answer, to get this thing moved off center for him?
Well, you have a committee of the whole meeting coming up,
Right.
and if they're there for that, I would presume, and I'm making the presumption, they would be able to meet after that with regards to it, because if it goes to committee of the whole, that would just extend the committee of the whole meeting, so the time shouldn't be a factor with that.
Okay.
And I just think that's the committee that this should go
Okay.
to
If I
at
may,
this
Mr.
point in time.
President, the chairman of the Committee of the Whole is also a member of the Utilities Committee, so there would be at least two members of the
Very
committee
good
there
then.
for
Right.
that meeting. So I would hope that's the way that it goes.
Thank you.
Very good.
And just one question, I mean, as far as for me, a time frame, so I can have something maybe to tell my realtors or the people that purchased my house have moved out of their house, so they're kinda, I don't know what's going on with all that, so I just kinda would like to be able to give them an answer, like a month or so, or
Well, I think we're looking at the meeting
weeks.
time if you're,
On the
the 24th is when the committee of the
Okay.
whole meeting is.
so like in a couple weeks or something, they get, just to give them a kind of a feel for where they're at too.
I would think that at least there would be a recommendation on the 24th.
Okay.
But of course, it would be up to the council to make the ultimate
Then it would come
decision.
before the council again, so I would say if you would, to look at approximately a month would be
Okay.
a fair time frame,
Okay.
depending
Well,
upon
just
what
so they
happens.
have an idea of what's going on.
Right.
Thank you guys very much.
All right, thank you, sir.
No.
All right, I have Rob Johnson, Bike Week.
Good evening, everybody. About a year and a half ago, I come before you guys and asked for permission to hold a bike event. In a lot of ways, you mostly all were there. I ran in most of you, and it was very successful. I went off without a hitch. Everybody seemed to enjoy it, and everybody wanted it back. Well, tides have changed a little bit in the fact that, as some of you know, I know Betty knows, and some of the council, I had to borrow from that fund that's the city established called the Events Fund. My intent was not to borrow from it, however, I had to because of some overtime and expenses and, things that add up. Well, this year, the numbers are coming in a lot slower for a variety of reasons, and I don't want to borrow from that fund again. So I'm here before you tonight to announce that we will not be having a bike week this year. I got to thank a lot of people, the group that helped me put this together last year. I brought on more people, took less responsibility, moved things around. But I foresee a greater cost to this year's event than last year's. And if I use last year's as a budget, I'm going to be over it. And right now, the money's not rolling in quite as fast. I do have some additional vendors that wanted to come in, food vendors and some non-food vendors, but I just still think the cost is going to be prohibitive, and I don't want to borrow from that fund again. I appreciate you guys' support last year. I've talked to everybody in my committee. We're going to work to bring it back next year if possible. I will come back before this body and ask for permission, as I did last year. I've already got them out there. I say, hey, we got knocked down this year. We'll be back next year. And I've told everybody that's been helping me, just start getting out there, talking to people, and get the buzz going. Not only the people that helped me, I would like to thank everybody on council, Debbie, Betty, that let me come in and talk to them, learn a lot over the last year. Ken's been helpful, the mayor. Everybody's been so helpful and supportive of this event. And I'd also like to, again, I've said it before here in front of you, I'd like to thank the car cruise people, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have tried it. I set my template after them as far as streets blocked off and as far as raising funds. And I'm thinking if we do it a little different, then we'll be more successful. I'd really like to give a great shout out to Jane Johnson for her support and her tireless work raising money for the car cruise this year. She did a great job. She also raised me some funds, which was wonderful. And I hope their event is very successful and they have great weather. I will stay after if anybody wants to talk to me, or if anybody has a question now, but I will be glad to stay after to talk to you. Thank you, Mr. President.
We appreciate that. Sorry to hear that, and hopefully you will be able to have it back next year.
Thank you.
All right, next, Elizabeth Thatcher.
Good evening, Councilman. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My notes are a little sketchy, but the message isn't. I'd like to address council tonight in regard to some city concerns. Not all of them tonight, but I'm going to start. One concern-
Elizabeth, excuse me. Would you pull the mic down?
Yeah. Can you hear that? One concern is the monies that have been raised by a small tax increasement for streets, alleys, and sidewalks and curbs to be improved this year. Well, I think there was some default on streets that were paved last year, so those were redone this year, and then there was a list. And then I read that council was thinking of adding more streets because they would have more monies. I'm not hearing too much about the sidewalks and the alleys and the curbs. And except there was some discussion about wanting to improve the downtown walks. Well, I was on council probably 25 years ago, and it was at that time that the sidewalks were done. It was a big project, and that was great. And I appreciate the concern that people have to do the downtown again. However, there are some streets, or sidewalks and alleys, residential, that have not been done for 50 years probably. Now, not all of the sidewalk in a block needs to be done, but there are sections that are raised, and some places there's no walk there at all. And this afternoon I was walking and saw a friend who isn't seeing very well and walking up Lincoln Avenue with a companion. And she stepped up on a rise, and I thought, oh, I hope she doesn't lose her balance and fall, because that just killed her. So I'm very concerned about that. There are a lot of people who walk the streets in Salem. I walk the dog 4 times a day, and I take different routes, but I'm always on up Lincoln Avenue, probably into the middle of the second block. And so I do hope that the sidewalks and the alleys are going to take precedence. I hope it's not going to be monies that are left over after all of the streets are done. So that's a great concern of mine. It's said that a community is only as good as the people who live here want it to be. And I want it to be what it was. We used to have a wonderful little city, and we had a lot of business. Downtown now is service, because some of the businesses have moved out to the east side. But I do think that perhaps with a little bit of incentive, we might get businesses, shops back here. My thought some years ago was, if the landlords who have empty buildings would be approached by City Hall, saying, you know, if we could get business in here, shops in here, would you consider giving the business owner free rent for 6 months to a year and let them pay the utilities? And then go out and get some of these businesses, shops to come in and see what our town looks like, and say, we've got these places, maybe you'd like to try it for a year. That's just a suggestion. But you've got nothing to lose, because I think you can only write off on tax so many years. And a lot of these buildings have been empty for some time. And of course, they're deteriorating because nothing's being done with them. So before we lose more buildings, perhaps we need to address that and think about some possibilities. Done the alley sidewalks. Another area of concern is one of grass, tall grass. I think it's 8 inches now or something. And there is an ordinance that requires a letter be sent to the property owner if the city is aware, if the city's called. And you send the letter to the property owner, and then he has 7 days to comply. Well, this can be repeated month after month during the growing season, and year after year, because a lot of these are rentals. So I think it's sort of redundant to keep sending a letter to these same people year after year, month after month. I think they know when the grass is overgrown. They're taking the monies in from the rental properties, so I think it's an obligation that they keep their rental properties looking decent. Perhaps, after the first letter, council might consider changing the ordinance, and after the first letter, and waiting 7 days, then the second time this occurs, maybe there should be a fine of $100, and the third time, $300, and the fourth time, $500, and maybe we can get these landlords to take note. Or maybe we should charge them what they get for their rental of that property. Anyway, it's not a hard thing, and, you know, they've got a lot of rental properties, it's all the same landlords. And it makes our city look very bad. So, and I drive around town, and it isn't just where I live, but it's around Third Street and Union and what have you. So perhaps you could mull that over and think about starting to find these people, because they're habitual, and they know. And so that's my second. There's a house up the street. There was a real estate sign, and I called the real estate people because, well, the house looks like something out of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The grass is almost as tall as I am, and the walk, it looks like somebody took a hammer and just went clear up the walk. And that walk was probably put in when the house was built. That's probably 150 years ago. And so I asked them how much rent they wanted, and they said $1,000 a month. And I said, how could you even think of asking $1,000 a month if you look at the property? And they said, well, the landlord has not, or the property owner has not been in touch with us for a couple months. So I see the sign is gone. And I called the city, thinking maybe they could find out who owned the property. And that was probably 3 weeks ago. And as of today, nothing has changed. And it's really a blight on the avenue. And I'm not a snob, but that's a nice avenue, and a lot of traffic goes up and down that avenue. And then on up, when you cross to Franklin, there's a wall in a big apartment building, and there are grass clippings all over the walk. I mean, they're sort of piled. And I know there's an ordinance that says you can't have the grass in the street. Well, I think maybe that ought to extend to not having grass on the sidewalk. That's not a hard thing to do, just to sweep it up. I think one year I did 6 bags of leaves and grass and took them across the street to a city worker and said, maybe you can dispose of these. But I don't want to do that every year. I don't think that's my job.
Mrs. Thatcher, I'm going to interrupt a second.
Yeah.
Normally, we give people approximately 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, I'm just-
State any concerns, and we're going on almost 10 minutes. I gave you a little latitude.
Okay, well, I'm just about done this time, but I will be back.
Well, you
So,
can bring those concerns
anyway.
back the next time.
Well, as I say, no, this is what I had today.
Well, we
and I-
only have so much time, though, with regards to
I
it.
appreciate your time, and as I say, I'm a citizen, been here all my life, and
We appreciate the
I
comments.
weep at the condition of our city. And
All right.
one more thing, Anderson Gross is an embarrassment to the city. I don't know why you can't find a fire hazard or a health hazard for that building. You're taking the signage down. I'd rather see the building fixed up, at least wash the windows after 15 years. Thank you for
All
your
right. Thank you very
attention.
much. That concludes the receiving of visitors. We'll move on to report of city officials. Mayor Berlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to remind everyone about Memorial Day, which is coming up. And I'd ask that everyone in Salem help to pay respect to those who gave the supreme sacrifice for our freedom by planning on attending both the Memorial Day Parade, which will be on May 30th, Monday, May 30th, beginning at 10 a.m. here at City Hall, and it will be traveling to Hope Cemetery. And then also please plan on attending the ceremony, which will be held at Hope Cemetery following the parade. I also would like to report that we have added additional streets to be repaved as a result of the final bid coming in less than estimated. Mr. Brown's aware of this. I am working on the final list. I'm waiting for the information from the engineer to be at hand. With that decrease, it will allow for part of the summer capital fund paving project to be used for improving the city parking lot behind City Hall. This improvement will continue to help solidify the commitment to economic development in our downtown business district. These funds that are going to be used for paving cannot be coming from the levy, but certainly are appropriate from our capital fund, which we told the voters we were going to continue to fund and use. Are there any questions regarding that? I know that the utility department is going to have their parking lot paved at their new building with their funds. So it seems like a good time and appropriate when the prices on asphalt and that type of work are as low as they are today. So we'll probably move forward with that project. Unless there are any objections. No questions. Also, Mr. Gall announced that he would like to have a special meeting following the Committee of the Whole meeting, and it appears as though there are not enough members of council here tonight to approve an ordinance that the Director of Public Service is asking for us to participate in the Ohio Department of Transportation contracts under cooperative purchasing. This particular ordinance needs to be passed and sent to the state of Ohio by the 27th of May. So without having a sufficient number of councilmen here to bypass statutory rules, I will also ask for a special meeting of council to be held following Mr. Gall's meeting, which is going to follow the Committee of the Whole meeting on May 24th, which is scheduled for 6:30. It should be a short meeting. It's simply to, after Mr. Cushman, I assume, will present this tonight for one reading, we will do the second and third reading at the next meeting. I will have my secretary send out the notice again to all councilmen so that they are aware of it. That would conclude my report, unless anyone has any questions for me.
Seeing none, thank you, Mayor. Move on to the Law Director, Attorney Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no formal report, but I would answer questions.
All right, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I just have one question. My wife read me the email you sent me about the scrapyard being postponed. That's been 4.5 years. That's a long time. But I can understand the reasons why somebody's sick this time, so that's fine. But I have one other question. At the last Rules and Ordinance meeting, I was given a draft copy of an amendment ordinance to Section 1193.01, Chapter 1193 regarding accessory buildings and uses. I was not even aware of that until I got to the meeting that night. How did that come about? Did somebody ask you to prepare it? Or?
That one, Mr. Brown, has been, Mrs. Dickey asked me to prepare it, but it's been changed numerous times in those meetings. There was some
normal procedure for something like this? It never even came out of council to have you do, I mean, the committee to have you do that.
I believe Mrs. Dickey initially asked me to prepare it as a discussion point before that meeting. So what happened to it after that, I don't know.
I don't know either. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the Law Director? Seeing none, thank you. The auditor, Mrs. Brothers, advised me prior to the meeting that she would have no report, but would entertain any questions from councilmen. Seeing none, move on to Treasurer, Dr. Conrad.
Thank you, President Howell, but I have no report unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, move on to Safety Service Director, Mr. Kentz.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mayor Berlin, and members of council. I only have one item tonight. At the last council meeting, I was asked about an additional leaf pickup. If my street department would be willing to undertake that, and what the associated cost. As I felt at the time, they would be more than happy to do it. The cost, they thought it'd be about 6 hours per man, that's 48 hours of overtime. It's like $1,680. I do have an anonymous donor to cover that. So as soon as Auditor Brothers notifies me that she has the funds, I will have them schedule. It'll be a one-time pickup for what's out there right now. So,
And you will be announcing that
Yes.
time frame.
yes.
All right.
Well, we really won't. We will, but we won't have to because we're only picking up what's there.
Right, but I
So,
mean,
oh yeah, as soon as,
so people know when
yeah,
to
that it's gonna
expect
be
that.
gone, yes.
Any questions, Mr. Brown?
I just want to thank Mr. Kentz for inviting me to attend that meeting this past Monday. It's very informative. The paving people were there, Hausenberg was there, the mayor and so forth, and we got a lot out of that. I do appreciate you asking me to attend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the people underestimate the amount of coordination that goes in that. Columbia Gas started their project on the southeast section of town last fall, knowing that we were gonna go ahead with this paving project, and they've been more than accommodating, working with the utility department. So I think we're very fortunate that we do have that working relationship in Salem.
Any other questions for Mr. Kentz? Seeing none, thank you. Utilities, Mr. Weingart.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, I have no report.
All right, are there any questions for Mr. Weingart?
If I may, Mr. Weingart,
Yes, sir.
just to reiterate the fact that you have a water flow issue this Thursday, so there may be some color disturbance in everybody's water. I wonder if we can just highlight the fact that, so you don't get 4,000 phone calls on Thursday when you flush the water. And my understanding is we're doing this for the purpose of hopefully reducing insurance premiums on the residents of the city. Am I correct that it's this Thursday?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gall, you're right. The Thursday will take place with a lot of water being wasted on the streets. We are hoping that it will not be inconvenient for anybody. It's being advertised in the paper, and of course, don't use the water if it's rusty or there.
Mr. President, Don, I'd like to ask you too, in the paper, it said residents. Pardon? I don't think it's necessary. It said residents, but would this also affect anyone in Perry Township or the other communities that we serve? You know, it's a very fine line between residents and non-residents, especially with Perry Township surrounding. Will they experience that too?
The way, Mr. Chairman, the way water flows, it could affect the Perry Township as well.
Okay.
Because of, but mainly it'll be in the industrial area. Because that's where they would like to have the higher flows. But it could affect Perry Township, could affect the whole area that we serve. Probably not Washingtonville or Newton.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weingart. Next, Parks Director, Mr. Faber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening, but I'm glad to answer questions.
Any questions for Mr. Faber? Seeing none, thank you. Council Clerk, Mrs. Bricker.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes the report of city officials. We will move on to report of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has not met. I have no report. However, I do have a resolution this evening.
All right, that'll be number 28. That was the one that the mayor was talking about
Yes, sir.
earlier.
Thank you.
Streets, alleys, and sidewalks, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has not met. However, I want to remind everyone that my committee is meeting on May 31st at 6 p.m. in council chambers, of course, to discuss the sidewalk project as requested by Mrs. Karen Carter. And I am adding another thing to the agenda, which will be held prior to this, because we're going to take a few minutes. I'm going to be sending a note to Mr. Kentz and to Mrs. Betty Brothers to ask them please to attend. We're going to discuss for just a few minutes the 2016 paving project. That will take about 10, 15 minutes at most, so then they can leave immediately after if they want to, but I would like Mr. Kent's to stay, though, for the sidewalk project, because he has all the information on it. That's all I have, thank you.
All right, any questions for Mr. Brown? Seeing none, thank you. Utilities, Mr. Gall.
Mr. Chairman, the committee has not met, but I am requesting a meeting of the Utilities Committee following the May 24th Council of the Whole meeting. And if we can do this, are we allowed to amend the call for the special meeting of City Council to add an ordinance that would allow Mr. Fast's property to be tapped into the ordinance? Or do we have to wait? If the call has not been made for the special meeting yet, therefore the agenda has not been made up yet, can we not add to that agenda?
It would require, if I may, Mr. President, for the special meeting, you would have to have 24-hour notice of what's to be on that agenda. So if you, I guess, prospectively put Mr. Fast's issue on there, not knowing yet what your committee may do.
Well, I just noticed that we have 3 weeks before the next city council meeting. So therefore, that would push that back even another week. I'm just indicating that my understanding is that on a notice for a special council meeting, the matters that are brought forth can be put into, or should be put into the notice.
Yeah, it has to be specific. That is correct, Mr. Call. There's no reason that you couldn't put that issue on to the special.
I mean, it doesn't mean it has to be approved. It just means
Correct.
I'm asking that it could be brought up at that time.
And I guess in that regard, the mayor is gonna be sending out a new notice for special meeting, is that
Mhm.
correct? Then perhaps you could coordinate and make sure that all those issues are on that notice, and that would suffice. That way, in the event that your committee, prior to the special meeting, approves some action in Mr. Fast's behavior, or Mr. Fast's favor, then you could take action on it at that special meeting.
Just coordinate with
Thank
the
you.
mayor then.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Traffic and safety, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has not met. I have no report. However, we do have a meeting scheduled for Monday, May 23rd at 6 p.m. We are taking the max hiring age of the firefighter issue to our committee.
Right. Any questions for Mr. Whitehill? Seeing none, thank you. Rules and ordinance, Mrs. Dickey is not here. I don't believe that you had a meeting, if I am correct on that.
No meeting has been held and none is scheduled.
All right. And Mr. Gall, we do have,
We will be
Two
requesting
ordinances.
this
Okay.
second reading of both 26 and 27.
all right, very good. Parks, Mr. Paparotis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a report that the Salem Parks Commission meeting is tomorrow, May 8th at 5 p.m. on the ground floor of the Memorial Building. Also, the East Cold Run Reserve, also known as City Lake, is open for fishing now. And the lake opened on April 19th. The Go Wild in the Parks program in partnership with the Salem Public Library continues. Last year, there were 16 scheduled programs throughout 2015. This year, 25 programs have been scheduled throughout 2016. All the programs are free. The summer schedule has been released and includes programs such as Wildflowers, Geocache Snakes and Turtles, and Gold Medal Palooza. The next program coming up on June 8th at 6 p.m. will be on stream sampling. It will be held at the Eagleton Glen Recreation Area, also known as the Tea Garden Covered Bridge in the south of town. Also, the schedule has been released for the Salem Summer Concert Series at Waterworth Memorial Park. 17 concerts have been scheduled for 2016. 12 Sunday evening concerts, 3 Friday evening concerts, and 2 Wednesday evening concerts. Sunday evening concerts begin at 6 p.m., while Wednesdays and Friday concerts at 7 p.m. The first concert of 2016 season is on Sunday, June 5th, featuring Rudy and the Professionals. That's my report.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Paparotis? Seeing none, thank you. Economic Development, Mr. Nestic is not here this evening. Mr. Whitehill, is there anything with that?
I don't have a report.
All right, very good. Committee of the Whole, I don't believe there's any report on that. This would reiterate that there is the Committee of the Whole meeting that will be on May 24th at 6:30 PM with a couple of meetings to follow that. That concludes the report of the standing committees. Move on therefore then to second and third readings of ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Gall.
Mr. President, I ask that a second reading of 160503-26 be read for just the second reading.
Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 26 by title only for its second reading, please?
Being an ordinance repealing and removing Chapter 353 of Part 3 of the codified ordinances of the City of Salem regarding parking meters.
Mr. Gall?
Mr. President, I move second reading of ordinance number 27, please.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 27 by title only for its second reading this evening?
Being an ordinance amending Section 1193.01 of Chapter 1193 of the codified ordinances of the City of Salem.
Thank you. That concludes the second and third reading of ordinances and resolutions. We'll move on to the introduction of ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the council suspend council rules so that resolution number 28 can be considered tonight.
All right, is there a second on that? Mr. Whitehill. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Gall?
Yes.
Mr. Paparotis?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, the council rules are suspended. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move the clerk read resolution 28 by title only with emergency clause for its first reading this evening.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read resolution number 28 by title only with emergency clause for its first reading this evening?
Being a resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to participate in the Ohio Department of Transportation contracts under the Cooperative Purchasing Program for the purchase of machinery, materials, supplies, including road salt, or other articles pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, Section 5513.01B, and declaring an emergency.
Very good, thank you. That concludes the introduction of ordinances and resolutions. We'll move on therefore to pleasure of council. Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do my best to try to read this, because best thing I can do is try to read it. There was an article in the Salem News on May 16th stating that vacant buildings are stunning downtown growth. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to come up with that conclusion. Who would want to buy or lease a building that are in dire need of repairs? If the owners are not pressured to make the necessary improvements, then we will continue to have vacant buildings. The city has a plan that will cost $500,000 to repair the curbs and sidewalks within 2nd Street and Pershing. I believe without the owners being an active partner to improve downtown, we will accomplish nothing except wasting $500,000. That's all I have to say.
Very good. Mr. Gall.
Mr. President, I'd like to welcome Salem Chiropractic. We have a new business opened by Dr. Grubbs and Dr. Peters. It's located at 568 East State Street. We're always happy to have a new business on State Street. And I'd also like to welcome Amanda's Candy Cottage, Gifts and Flowers. The young lady is actually moving from Columbiana and will be opening a store on East State Street. So it's nice to hear. That's some good news for the vacant buildings that we're trying to fill.
Very good. Is that all?
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing this evening.
All right, Mr. Paparotis.
I have nothing this evening either. Thank you.
Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. When our kids have birthdays, I think we're reminded of just how fast that time goes. My daughter was 4 when I first took a seat on this council, and tonight I wish her a happy 11th birthday this Friday to Paige. Thank you.
Very good. Only thing I have is, there was mentioned by the mayor, the Memorial Day Parade. I have signed city council up for that. I will send the notification out to you as to where we will be as far as our spot to line up at, and give you that information. But we've always participated in that. Not everybody always can, but those that can, certainly, we welcome them to be there. Like I say, I'll get you the additional information. That is all I have, therefore the meeting is adjourned.